This is the Haulin Assets podcast, where we show you how to start and run your own trucking company. Ever wanted to go out on your own? Follow Chris as he goes through the highs and lows of running on his own authority.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Haulin Assets podcast, episode number 173. We're talking January 2025 financials. I am Craig, your host. Over there, he is Chris.
Sounds a little weird to say 2025.
Does it still?
It's still a little bit.
Yeah. Well, we're recording this at the end of February, so I've gotten used to it. But what can I say, Chris? We were just comparing.
I'm a little slow.
We were comparing our ages, and we've determined that I'm the young, spry one of the two of us.
You definitely are.
Yeah. If only that were true. All right. So, Chris, we're talking financials today, and it's going to look pretty similar to what we did last month. So those who listen to that episode, be prepared for a little more of the same. So we may get through this pretty quickly. If we do, I've got a story for you at the end of the episode about the time that I accidentally committed a hate crime.
I'm kind of excited about this, and this sounds interesting. This should be good. I'm going to stick around.
All right, well, I mean, you have to.
I kind of have to.
So, all right, let's talk what's going on in the company before we get to the numbers, and then I'll do all of my housekeeping stuff a little bit later. Anything interesting, exciting going on in the company?
Yeah, we've had a couple things in the last, actually, few days that, you know, you got to love trucking. There's always something going on. So one of them, we had a driver that picked up a load of chocolates.
Nice.
You know, big old truckload of chocolates.
Hey, it's February.
It is February. And he took them, delivered them, and they rejected 7 of the cases. And this is really on a whole truckload.
7 pallets or
boxes.
Oh, okay.
So it's not much. And they were not very big boxes.
Okay.
But they rejected them because they're expiring too soon, which too soon was July of this year. I guess they can't move that kind of a product in 4 months or so.
Okay.
So anyway, I mean, I thought about it. I'm like, it's a good thing I was not the driver on this load, because they rejected them and they were small enough that we needed to move on to our next load. The broker wasn't telling us what they wanted to do with it in time. So he just took them, threw them in his cab and took off. And so I'm thinking, man, it's good that wasn't me, because, you know, you fat kid in a candy store. I don't think I'd have been able to resist that temptation. I'd been, you know, the kid on Willy Wonka that falls into the chocolate river.
Yeah, you're Augustus Gloop.
Yeah, that guy. Yeah.
Hey, I've got 2 kids. I know Willy Wonka like the back of my head.
I chocolate all over my face. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what happened to the chocolate. It just disappeared.
So you still get paid for hauling those, yes?
Yeah.
Or are they write-offs for you as well?
No, a situation like that, it shouldn't hurt us at all. There's no damage to the product. It's strictly the shipper's fault for
sending
something that the receiver wasn't willing to take. So
okay,
that one shouldn't hurt us. There are situations where, like, if they say our driver damaged it because they were driving erratically or something, you know. But it's pretty rare that, you know, something like that comes back and bites us. We usually don't take the hit on it.
Well, you know, the last time that something like this happened that affected me at all, Chris, my family ended up dining really well on mac and cheese for weeks.
Yeah.
So I look forward to the giant box of chocolate showing up.
We'll have to see. That's still in limbo. What's happening with that chocolate?
It's just a good thing it wasn't you, because then we know what would have happened to it already. Okay. Yeah. Any other stories from the road?
You know, we also a few days ago had truck 12, which is our newest truck, fewest number of miles, just decided to crap out on the side of the road. You know, it's actually still in the shop. Don't know what's going on with it, but it's one of those situations. This is one of the things that kind of gets frustrating with trucking, is then we have to scramble, right, and try to figure out, you know, we don't want to upset our customer. You know, it's a customer we work with a lot, and they're pretty good about, you know, understanding that this kind of stuff happens, but it's also a load that they need to have delivered. So I spent most of the day yesterday, and this is part of the reason we're recording this episode a little later than we normally do. You know, usually it'd be launched by now. We're, you know, going to be a few hours late on getting this thing posted, but it's because yesterday I ended up spending like half of my day chasing down a rental truck, kind of coordinating new appointments and doing a bunch of other stuff to try to make this work. And, we did. The load actually, we were able to get everything rescheduled, delivered early this morning. But, that's just trucking. And that's one of the things that I think really separates, one company from another is if you're willing to dive in and solve a problem like that. It's probably, I don't know exactly what the bill's going to be on it yet, but probably, an additional $500 to rent the truck. And we didn't have to go too far with it. So I don't know exactly mileage wise what we're going to get charged yet. But if you want to be successful in business, sometimes you have to take a hit like that. And you have to, it shows our shipper that we're going to do our best to get their load there, even, sometimes when it's not in our best interest.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about this all the time, but long-term thinking, right? The short-term thinking is you throw your hands up in the air and be like, well, I guess this load's a write-off. Yeah, it's not our fault. Throw the contract in somebody's face or whatever, Long-term thinking says, look, it's doing it this way, renting a truck, finishing the load is going to put us $500 or whatever in the hole, but it'll save the relationship with this shipper and we'll make that up over time rather than having to, get fired and find a new client and all that stuff. So yeah, long-term thinking.
Yeah. And it'll pay off in the long run.
Okay. Now, Chris, in my notes, you wrote down one more thing that you wanted to talk about before numbers, and it simply says MATS, M-A-T-S.
Yes.
What's this?
We talked about it last month. It's the Mid-America Truck Show. It's coming up. Less than a month to go. Super excited to be out there. Want to meet as many of our listeners as I possibly can. So please, if you're coming to MATS, look up Motor Carrier HQ, the Haulin Assets podcast. I'll be in the booth. Love to meet you. I forgot to look at the booth. I think it's 38549 is the booth number that we're in.
Just look for, if you're looking out on the floor, look for the booth with the mass of helium-filled balloons floating above it that all have my face on them.
Were we supposed to order those?
Oh, did we fall down on that one?
Yeah, maybe not. Maybe don't look for that. By the food court. Remember that.
Okay, yeah.
Find us kind of over by the food court.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I mean, I won't be there, but I'm excited to hear the stories and hear about all the people who come up and say hi. And if my experience at similar conventions is any indication, it'll be a lot of fun to interact with those
Should be a
folks.
good time.
So, okay, Chris, before we do numbers, I'll just remind everybody, HaulinAssetsLLC.com. Go there. You can look at the profit and loss that Chris and I are about to talk about. You can also look at last month's profit and loss, which is, very, very similar. But anyway, let's see. What did I say? HaulinAssetsLLC.com, MotorCarrierHQ.com for the tools, tips, and people to help you make the shift from employee driver to owner operator. And if you want to do some self-educating, go to HaulinAssetsAcademy.com for some courses that you can take, which, as online courses go, are very affordable and extremely helpful. So, am I forgetting anything?
That's it.
Okay. Rate, review, go to Facebook, all that stuff. All right, let's talk numbers, Chris. How are you feeling? Do you feel like you're spinning wheels? Do you feel like, okay, this is a decent holding pattern? Where's your mindset?
It definitely feels a little bit more like we're kind of spinning wheels. I was hoping, if you remember, last January was a really good January. And I was kind of hoping for a little bit more of the same this year, but that didn't happen. January turned out to be, fairly average. We did about the same number of miles as we did last January, but the rate this January was significantly lower. And I was trying to figure out, why is that? Because it doesn't feel like the market, over the last several months is really much different than it was, previously. But
previously,
or even last January.
That's what I was going to ask you about. When you talk seasonality, there's yearly seasonality, but then there's other things. And we just went through the presidential election, the inauguration in January, and whatever you think of, Trump and policies and all that, there's been a lot of uncertainty, a lot of movement politically, which can have a big effect on markets. So do you consider that sort of thing as well, not just annual seasonality, but that kind of 4-year?
To a certain extent, although, I think this kind of happens almost every time a new president comes into office. Like there's that uncertainty. And then, once that's determined who that new president's going to be, even though they're really not going to impact things as much as we think they are, just the fact that, hey, we know what's coming ahead tends to kind of loosen things up a little bit. And so I don't think necessarily Trump coming into office has had a big impact on rates or anything just
market,
yet.
Yeah.
But give it a little bit of time, and it might. It's one of those things. Just you kind of have to see. I've been putting a lot of thought into why are these two Januaries so different. And the only thing I can really think of, and I'm pretty sure this at least played a part, if not a big part, in that rate difference, is last January, the weather was insane, especially out west where we were, and I-80 got shut down a bunch, and that anytime that kind of thing, those weather patterns happen, it causes an impact. It screws up schedules. More companies are scrambling to find trucks that they were usually relying on, and I think that people got desperate for trucks in January last year, and so they increased rates, and rates were a little bit stronger than they were this year.
Interesting. When I was I guess I was just out of college, and I read a couple of books, and they were both around military issues, but one of them was about how geography is destiny for a country, militarily and in other ways. And the other one was about climate and weather and how that affects countries and movement and all that. And wow, it's amazing to see some of the parallels. Where are you going? What's the weather there? What is it usually, but what is it this week? And what sort of effect that can have on a company and rates. And there are so many moving parts. There's no way to accurately predict, at least not to any high degree of certainty. We're all just doing the best we can to figure out what's coming down the pike, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Chris, let's talk then numbers. Total miles run, very similar to last month. What are we at?
119,570. So again, this, not just similar to last month, but kind of looking at our average over the last 12 months, right there.
Yep. Okay. Deadhead miles.
8,599, which is a little over 7%.
7%?
Yeah, I've got it wrong on that.
Okay, yeah. Here I am not checking your math.
Yeah, I think it was 7.15 if I remember right.
Okay, all right. So yeah,
fair, a little higher than last month, but not. I mean, it's still kind of in the ballpark.
So total revenue then comes in at
$247,795.86, and guess what? About average for the last 12 months. Yeah.
And you said the rate per mile was down compared to last January, but is it about what we were seeing last month?
Yeah. $2.07 a mile, which I think last month was $2.09 a mile. But and I think actually I think the average over the last 12 months was $2.11. So a little bit lower, but not too crazy different than what we've been seeing over the last 12 months.
Yeah. And similarly, the profit number then comes in again close to what we had last month.
Yeah, $15,862.03. Not just close to what we had last month, but almost spot on with the average over the last 12 months. So January was boring and average.
Yeah. Okay. So before we get to some of the profit and loss specifics, let me just ask you again, this is a question I ask you all the time, but it's kind of around that headspace. What are you thinking? And how are you feeling about the future of the company based on these numbers? Is this a sustainable wheel spinning? Or if it goes on for 3 months, 6 months, 12 more months, do you start to feel like, we could be in trouble?
Yeah, 6 to 12 more months, if it continues to be like this, it'd be tough. I don't want to, I hope that's not what the case is. And, interestingly, asking that question, I am this has been so hard. Like the last 3 years, usually you don't have a downturn in the freight market that lasts as long and has gone as deep as this one has. And so it makes me super leery to try to be optimistic, which I'm usually a pretty optimistic person. But I do feel like I'm hearing a lot more noise, whether it's from some of our customers, some of the brokers that we work with, even some of the news releases in the industry that things are starting to change a little bit, at least capacity's tightening a little bit. I talked recently to one of the brokers that we do, as far as a broker, we do probably our most business with these guys as a broker. And our contact there, have a great relationship with, he says that he hasn't had as difficult time covering loads for a long time. And that's a really good sign.
Meaning that there's a small shortage of trucks.
Yeah, he's not like he used to be able to, find trucks super easy, 3 or 4 days in advance. More and more, he's finding stuff same day, having a harder time booking stuff, even not being able to cover a load here and there. And that just wasn't happening, really even 6 months ago.
Okay. So is it the kind of thing where if you are able to situate yourself as a company that you can weather this 3-year-long storm, then here's a horrible analogy for you, but there's kind of the weak animals in the herd get picked off, and those that are left are the strong ones. And then when things do pick up, there's a smaller number of mouths to feed in the industry.
Absolutely. Those typically the first 6 months of a recovery, if you've made it that far, you're going to do pretty well. And honestly, if you're still in business right now, you're doing something right. Like you're definitely doing something all right. You are one of the strong ones. A lot of companies in the last couple of years have gone out of business. Even some really big companies have gone out of business. So if you're sticking around, if you're still around, you've done things right, and your hook's going to be in the water when things change. And and that's usually the best time to be in, because you're kind of playing catch up. People haven't been willing to jump back in yet because they're not seeing anything good going on. And it takes a little while for people to realize that and catch up. And so you usually kind of have some pretty good pickings early on in a recovery.
Okay. That might actually be a really cool topic to revisit. When we started this podcast 6 years ago,
oh my goodness
Chris,
sakes.
We talked pretty frequently back then about when is the right time to start your trucking company. And at the time you were saying, hey, there's no best or worst time. The right time is when you're ready to do it. Don't worry about the freight market. But that might be an interesting topic to revisit in light of the difficulties over the last few years across the industry. So something to think about. Yeah. And I'd love to hear some questions from people along those lines. If you want to hit us up on Facebook or on the website.
I'll give a couple real quick. Like I've said in the past, the right time is when you're ready and you're prepared. You've got a little bit of money to back you up, that kind of thing. But outside of that, the best time to do it is right when the economy's starting to turn, because typically truck prices and equipment trailer prices are really low, and like they are right now. The problem is it's just so hard to time that. You never know when that's going to turn. And so that's part of the reason I say, you need to do it when the timing's right for you, because you can't, it's just so hard to time a market. You see too many people that on the other end of the spectrum jump in after it's been good for a year thinking, oh, everybody's doing really great or whatnot. And then they buy when truck prices are high, and all of a sudden rates start going down, and that's just not a good time. So timing's, it's hard, it's finicky.
Yeah. Okay. Chris, let's talk some specifics before we abandon this episode forever. So we want to get into some P&L stuff. I know there were some damages that you guys dealt with last month. Trailer doors,
yeah,
what happened there?
Some, just an unfortunate incident where, a lot of kind of perfect storm things happened, and trailer door got damaged, and it was about $1,200. So you'll see that in there. Moving on to fuel. fuel's kind of in January creeped up a little bit. Especially if you look at it as a percentage of revenue, it got up to 29.9%, almost hitting that 30% mark, which is definitely a lot higher than it has been over the last 12 months. It feels like in the last few weeks it's kind of come down just a little bit. So hopefully, that'll continue to happen. But it's definitely not. That's part of the reason our net income was a little bit lower than I would have liked to have seen.
I noticed a line item for workers' comp, which I wasn't expecting necessarily at this point.
Workers' comp's usually pretty steady.
Well, not that the line item wouldn't be there, but that it was different than what I'm used to seeing.
So it is. It's not what we would have expected. But the reason is because when you typically pay work comp based on wages, and it's usually projected wages. And so you estimate, this is what we think we're going to pay in wages. Here's what it is. And your work comp people at the end of the, a year or 12-month period will typically require you to submit to them all your payroll figures. They do an audit and determine if you underpaid or overpaid. And if you overpaid, they refund you. If you underpaid, they collect more money. So we underpaid about $1,900.
Okay.
So our work comp bill was about $1,900 more in January than normal, and that's why.
Okay. And then maintenance and repairs seemed normal.
Yeah, maybe even a little low.
Okay.
So they're pretty decent.
It's enjoy the good months while you can on the maintenance and repairs lines. Okay, so we got to revisit. Chris, take a deep breath. The North Carolina parking debacle. We'll call it a debacle. It's a nice. A snafu might be more appropriate.
$1,500. Yep, on the P&L right there.
So you talked about that last month, and it finally hit.
It hit. Yep,
so
there it is.
Okay, well, so that's there. We don't. You can go back and listen to last month's episode, and we'll leave it. All right. Lastly, Chris, I want to talk about fuel tax because that was a pretty big expense.
Yeah,
there.
and this, not a surprise. It comes around every quarter.
Yeah.
So, but it's $2,400.
So this is a little different than people have to deal with when it's just your consumer level. I'm filling up my Mazda. I pay the fuel tax when I fill up the tank, and that is not the case for the trucking industry.
You do pay it, but it's so different in every state that you have to reconcile it, and sometimes you end up owing more. We always end up owing more because Utah has a relatively low fuel tax, whereas like a California or Pennsylvania has a relatively high one. So if you don't fuel enough in those other states with the high fuel tax, you're going to end up owing, which we do. Plus, on top of that, you've got Oregon that just completely screws you. I don't know this for sure, but it feels to me, I'm pretty sure this is the case because you don't pay any fuel tax at the pump.
Right.
And so I don't think any consumer like private vehicles pay for road maintenance fuel tax at all. It's all burdened on truckers. It's like 23 cents a mile every mile you drive into Oregon.
To be fair, Chris, to us low-level compact car drivers, my brother was he was in college he got his master's degree in civil engineering and did a lot of work on roads and weight limits and all that. And he said, when we're considering materials and locations and all that, and we're considering the strength of the asphalt we're putting down or the concrete we're putting down, he said, we don't even think about cars or pickups.
Yeah, they don't.
It doesn't even factor in.
Yeah.
It's so insignificant compared to you big old freaking truckers out there.
80,000-pound trucks driving down the road, 34,000 pounds on
at 70 miles
tandem.
an hour.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Chris. Any other tidbits you want to pull out from the P&L?
I think that's it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of a short one today.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Stick around. I'll run the credit music, and then if you want to hear a really unfortunate story about my youthful indiscretions, then you can. If you don't, then you're not missing anything. I swear, Mom. So that being said, Chris, I will see you next time.
See you then.
All right, Chris.
I'm ready for this one.
Story time. So I genuinely can't remember if I've ever told stories about my childhood best friend, Nigel. Nigel, by the way, not English. He's born and raised in Utah, ended up living in Idaho. And anyway, so he was my childhood best friend, and we got into lots of fun trouble, mostly insignificant, just youthful indiscretions.
Pretty innocent.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we used to sneak out at night and just roam the town in the middle of the night, and it was a favorite pastime of ours. And every once in a while, we'd TP a house or whatever. We had our favorite things to do. You ever see somebody has they put their swamp cooler or their air conditioner on the top of the house, and just for whatever reason, they put it there instead of down on the ground. But it's still hooked up to all the ducting throughout the house, right? And so we would go to the apple orchard and pick apples and throw them at the AC units and swamp coolers. And if you tag it hard enough, it just reverberates through the whole house. The entire ducting system is vibrating, right?
Wake everybody up.
Exactly. And then you laugh as all the lights turn on. It was the stupidest thing, right? To give you an idea, I was about 11 or 12 at the time, right? Well, around that time, we're doing one of our nightly rounds through this little sleepy Utah suburban town.
And you've got a good baseball arm.
I could wing it. I've lost so much of my upper body strength in my middle age now, but yeah, I could wing it back then. So anyway, we're wandering around. We get to the junior high that we were attending at the time, and there was a construction project going on there. And so we were kind of picking around, looking at the equipment that they'd left out. Well, you know those spools that you have for extension cords, right? Those kind of orange spools. Yep. Found one of those, and it was full, brimming over with nylon string. There was so much, miles and miles of nylon string in an unbroken loop in this thing. Yeah. And what a gold mine. Imagine the possibilities. What could you do with this nylon string?
You weren't pulling wire like it's supposed to be used for, huh?
No. So we took it because we had no moral compass because we were 12. We took it and, we tied up an entire block of about 10 houses. We just tied them up, tied it to trees and poles around it, just walked around it a few times, tied it up. It was amazing. And then we had a little bit left over at the end, and we're like, what are we going to do? So we picked a house at random, and it was garbage day the next day. So everybody's garbage cans were out front. And again, because we were dumbass kids, we thought it would be funny to pick a house, tie the garbage can to the front door and the garage door, so that when this person left in the morning, the garbage can would tip over, garbage would go everywhere, and ha, isn't this hilarious? So we did, and then didn't think much of it, go to school the next day. And what's everybody talking about? Everybody is talking. I
don't know what happened.
This made the papers. Wow. There were serious inquiries. I'm sure the cops were involved and all that. But anyway, come to find out that we had randomly, accidentally targeted the house of the only Pakistani family living in the entire town. And of course, everybody's just like, who would do this? Well, why would you pick on this family this way? And we felt awful. I mean, awful. That kind of put an end to our shenanigans at that point, because we felt so terrible. But I went and did a bunch of research and didn't tell anybody this story for like 4 years, because I found out that was the statute of limitations in the state of Utah for a crime like this. And I'm 12. What are they going to do, right? But that was my thinking at the time. Like, I can't tell this story.
You really thought this through.
Yeah, it was that was let's call it a learning moment, Chris.
That's funny.
So there you go. There's your story time for our short episode today.
That's good. That's a good one.
Yeah. Next time you can tell me about the hate crimes that you've committed.
You meanie. Yeah. I'll have to think about that one. I'm not sure I have. I'm not such a delinquent like you.
I'll see you, Chris.
See you.